and welcome to the Diablo podcast. I am your host, Xanth, and today I am joined by Nineball
Oh, hi.
and Nerdwords,
Hello.
noted streamer and whale. Uh,
It continues. It
I was
continues.
I was not going to forget that. And the Diablo podcast is brought to you by PureDiablo.com, your home for an ever expansive wiki, this podcast, and an amazing community. So head on over today after you're done listening, of course. So, gentlemen, we are here. We have filled our bellies with Thanksgiving turkey and gator, Nineball. I don't know.
It's good.
Okay, that sounds right.
It's not a typical Thanksgiving dinner, but what was it? I actually just had it a couple weeks ago. Was the last time I had gator.
You're not breaking any stereotypes, but I appreciate
Florida man. Yeah.
that. As long as you're not
I
going full Florida man. I, like
I
Florida
haven't made the
gator.
front page of any national newspapers yet, so
Yeah.
no,
Never go full Florida man.
never go full Florida man. I do have to say one thing. Probably this is only for like Rush's benefit, but the urge to interrupt you during the opening was so strong.
And honestly, I will say I was derailed. I had to add in the brought to you by after the fact. So even without saying it, you still managed to do it, and that is impressive. Um, so Gator dinners aside, why are we here? Well, there's plenty to talk about. Um, we haven't talked in a while. We had our interview with Jay Wilson a few weeks back, and took a little respite. And in the meantime, it does appear that the Diablo 4 closed endgame beta has ended. Um, wouldn't know. Would have been nice, but whatever. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. But it is over, which is also a good thing, even if you weren't in it, because it means we're getting closer and closer to release. So, with the end of the beta, um, how are you guys feeling about June? I've heard rumors about an April release. Some people are feeling really hot about April, like suddenly it's going to be early spring and not early summer. Thoughts, guys?
I mean that would sound beautiful to me. We know at least the long term goal or the long term like goalpost is June because of the Microsoft announcement. Everything will be released within the 12 months, yada yada. But yeah, there is a whole bunch of rumors that are going on out there that you've seen that it's like release date's going to get announced either during or right before the Video Game Awards on December 8th, and that it's a tentative like April release date is what I've seen thrown out there for the various rumors and such that have been talking about it.
Yeah, I'm also incredibly excited. Hopefully, we find out sooner rather than later. I mean, I don't really care which one it is. I would like to have it announced soon. The sooner we know, the more I can begin my planning.
Time
'Cause
off requests.
right, time off requests, building a new PC for it's just the little things that little check boxes you want to do before the game comes out. So.
Well, here is to hoping that we do get it at least announced, because that has been the rumor that's been out for a while, and it seems like we're pushing in that direction that we should get some form of an announcement on December 8th at the Game Awards. That sounds like I'm advertising it. Um, it feels a little wrong, but at the Game Awards, there could be an announcement. Um, I think
Does anybody here actually watch the Video Game Awards?
Yes, I do.
Well, yeah, because it's like probably part of your job. But yeah, I don't even remember the last time I've even bothered to think about tuning in, and so
I've
it pains me a little bit that it's like, do I actually have to pay attention to this now? Do I need to watch it, or can I just? I guess I'll probably just sit back and then hit F5 on like Pure Diablo in order to see when it actually gets released.
I think if we
It's
just
typically it's typically a hotbed for news in general during the Game Awards. Like it has been the last few years anyway. So I always paid attention for that reason. Like I care very little about the awards, but I care more for the announcements and reveals that typically happen. It's kind of like a miniature E3 in December. It's always nice.
I'm Yeah, I know they exist. I I watched them. I know that like Game of the Year is a hot button issue that people want to debate. I don't care. Like, oh, this one's better. Did I enjoy this one? Did I enjoy that one? Great. And then that's that's all I need. But whatever. Whatever.
Yeah.
Um, I won't tune in, but I'll definitely be refreshing Twitter that night. Just like,
I think I'm set because like the only two games that I played this year were Elden Ring and God of War, so I think
But which
I'm
one wins it for
covered.
you? Which one wins it for
Oh,
you?
oh, God of War, 100%.
It's fair. It's
Yeah.
fair.
well, I'm in the Elden Ring camp. So now this podcast is over. No, I really, again, I don't care.
Sorry,
I
everybody.
don't care. I don't give out the award. The award I gave both games was my money. So they
It's fair.
both won, and I think they should be happy with it because I don't give that out to just any game. But the general rumor is that they're also going to be announcing some form of a pre-order, um, maybe possibly tied to beta access, which in my brain might make some sense. For the tattoo event, we did get not only beta access, but a free copy of the game. Is that something that they would put out there in connection with it? It seems logical now since the beta access was not tied to the closed endgame beta that we saw. But would it, by giving a free copy of the game, be akin to pre-ordering and it comes with beta access? I could see it happening.
Mm-hmm.
I would also
Yeah.
say that with the rumor of an early year open beta, that would fall in line with that if they announced pre-orders and pre-order gave you access to said open beta. That would make a lot of sense, and that would also line up with an April release window as well. So we'll see. Again, holding out hope, but either way, just ready to rip the band-aid off.
Just want to get to it. And yeah, I understand that. So as the Band-Aid stays on for a little bit, IGN uh, did an interview with the Diablo 4 team, or at least with Joe Shelley and Rod
Ferguson.
Ferguson. Yeah. Um, Thank you. And if I'm guessing, this interview lasted an hour, and they cut it into about 2 weeks worth of material, which good on you. I don't think we could cut this podcast into 2 weeks of material. Um, Maybe if we tried, but Rush, you don't have to do that. But the nicety of it is not being in the beta, it gives at least an idea of what D4 is shaping up to be, right? So one of the first things that they kind of put out was this return to darkness, right? Diablo 3 got a lot of criticism, and we talked about it with Jay Wilson as well when it came to color, right? And this thought of Diablo 3 being um, a deviation from the more gothic roots of the Diablo franchise. So, to get this, it seems like trying to grab a little bit of the D1, D2 fan base with this concept of a return to darkness. Any thoughts that came to your guys' mind as you entered into this first little video?
I was totally giving us a nine ball. So um, So no, I mean, I think that it makes a lot of sense. You know, a lot of the publicity coming out when D3 came out, a lot of the initial fan reaction, or at least traditional D2 fan reaction, was that it was too colorful, right? I know you guys talked about that in the podcast with Jay. Um, it was so they really have to to kind of pull that fan base back in, at least from a marketing standpoint. They really have to intentionally market it that way, and say, hey, this is going this direction. And I'm glad they are, right? Like, it's, that's what pulled me into Diablo 1 when I was so young, was the really creepy and eerie nature. I mean, it really had some almost survival horror elements to it, especially when you came around the corner and Butcher murdered your face. So there's definitely that dark, scary, you against the world mentality that Diablo 1 and Diablo 2, I think, did a really good job of emulating. And I think Diablo 3 lost that a little bit. I feel like from a narrative standpoint, it was a different turn. I don't think it was necessarily bad. We could talk about the different plot points that were, whatever. But the darkness was really the problem, right? People felt like that the tone of it wasn't quite on the same level as what Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 were. But for better or for worse, they really have to market this that way to combat that exact sentiment. So I think it's smart, and it looks like it's true, right? It absolutely seems like it's true based on the content we've seen, the videos we've seen. The game looks beautiful and very dark and gothic, right? So I'm excited either way, but it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that they even, it kind of goes throughout, like you were saying earlier, like it's like it was one interview that was broken up into a whole bunch of sections. Is in one of the later interviews, they're even going through and talking about how they used some of the art design, and that whole kind of like philosophy of the Return to Darkness to make combat more grounded. It's like even though you have all these big explosions and elemental skills and all this other types of stuff going off, that it's like everything looks as if it fits within the zone, feels right. Even when you have elites and things, they're not. There's no blue monsters running around. There's no yellow monsters. There's none of the the Diablo 2 green, purple, blue, orange things that are going through. It's just like they're using other tools in order to go through and identify like these are the elites or these are the champions. And that's kind of like a underlying philosophy in every aspect that they have going on in the game.
I think you bring up a good transition, so we'll jump a little out of order here, but to combat, right? In Return to Darkness, that getting back to the feel of combat, we did get a video detailing out like how combat could kind of be or uh, would play out. And I think the one line that I really took away was when they mentioned that like you're not going to have an overwhelming amount of skill effects like happening simultaneously, and that like it will essentially be more grounded and slower paced, which felt like a nice like little kind of not a critique, but like an alternative to something like Path of Exile, where it is the pace has gone well, it is amped up by a large margin. There's a lot of skill effects happening simultaneously where it can be hard to discern really what is going on. So to hear them say that, I found to be a little bit more intriguing, right? I've said it before on different podcasts. I don't mind going slower if it feels intentional, if it feels good. Um, so that to me, if that's their intention, like we'll keep it a little bit slower paced. We're not gonna clutter the ground. We're not gonna highlight all the monsters in yellow, blue, or whatever. Um, I'm okay with that. But I'd be curious what you guys are thinking when you went into that combat video.
Well, I'm glad that you went through and you brought up Path of Exile because it definitely is a case of Pandora's box. Because as we've seen, GGG has been trying to slow things down. They've been trying to roll back everything: attack speed, movement speed, the skill cooldowns, magic find. They're trying to slow the game back down to a point where they originally wanted to, because they had let things just get out of control over the last few years. In the community, didn't like that, to put it kindly. For a very, very, very vocal group of players, just were not happy with the direction of going backwards when they had spent all these years, speeding things up, speed, speed, speed. So it definitely is one of those things that even Diablo 3 when the game first came out was a bit more slower, had a bit more visceral combat than just clearing the entire screen, especially when you were getting into the Inferno modes. So starting there is a good point, but I really what I am looking at is the future, in being that I hope that they keep that, and that we don't just slowly keep pressing the accelerator, every patch, every season, until we end up with D3 Path of Exile type speeds and such. I mean, hell, even D2R. Once you get to sufficiently geared Enigma Hammerdins and such.
Yeah, because then it goes from I mean, Diablo 3 level 1 to like 20 is a snail's pace. It's really slow to like absolutely frenetic at the top end where you can barely understand what's happening on the screen, especially in some of those higher greater rifts and stuff too. So it's there's always going to be like a almost like a scale from where the game starts to where the mid game is to where the end game is, and how frenetic or slow paced that combat is. But they've got a really good team of developers and a team that's been working on this for a long time to put that together. So the fact that they are consciously making decisions on things like time to kill and things like that just it shows a lot of promise. They're saying all the right things, which is great, and the combat looks fantastic. So we'll see how it plays out for sure.
And I mean, Nineball, you've gotten a chance to play it, and granted, it was a long time ago, but um, uh, how did that early combat feel?
I mean, trying to go through and remember the demo from 2019.
You must remember
Yeah,
Nine Ball.
Yeah.
I have to remember. I mean, it felt good. It had a pacing of what I remember, like early Diablo 3 in game, kind of being like, where you had everybody had a dodge, so you had like the little movement skill in order to go through and get out of the way. So it had some interaction with the enemy attacks. It felt fluid, because you could kind of like predict where things were gonna like drop or shoot or hit. And so it wasn't, the goats throwing doors, things like that. It felt more refined, as if it had a better engine, running it in the background, which obviously, developed like 10 years later. It has, but yeah, I can definitely see the direction that is going, because it also makes it, when you have that slower paced combat, that your attacks can really feel weighty. And Nerdwords went through and mentioned like one of those key points in the interview, like the time to kill being one of those important metrics that they have. Those are things that actually matter, because if your time to kill, of something that takes 3 seconds to kill versus 1 second to kill, is huge. I mean, it's not just, when you think about it, 3 seconds isn't all that long, but when you're sitting there and you're playing, you've got like 5 second cooldowns rotating and buffs and such that can make a pretty marked difference, when you're playing. And just, it makes it feel as if you're like, your combos and you using your abilities, just feel better, because you can see things happen instead of just pressing one button and five things dying. That you have to press like two buttons repeatedly. And it just, you're rewarded more, I feel, in that respect.
Yeah, you're rewarded for your actions being intentional and
Yeah.
not just smashing your head against the keyboard. And that's good, right? Every game you want that. You want that strategy to it, at least a little bit, right? There are games where maybe you don't. Dynasty Warriors comes to mind. Just smash buttons. But right there, for Diablo, you want at least to have interesting decisions to make at a low level, in the mid game, and at the end game, during combat. And that's what's always made Diablo so good. They're it just sounds like, again, that they're really focused on the right things, and that's awesome.
And just as a brief movie interlude, because he mentioned Dynasty Warriors, amazing games, the movie is incredible. It is
Yes, it is.
terrible. I love that movie so much. Have you
But
ever
sometimes
wanted to have you ever wanted to see a horse run down a waterfall?
it's amazing.
Watch the movie. Yeah.
All right, I'm writing it down. Dynasty Warriors movie.
It's on Netflix.
It's on Netflix. Oh, that's even easier. All right, man.
Oh yeah, no.
It's a great flick to just turn on and go to sleep to. But
If
you
you're a
won't be able.
fan of if you're a fan of the games, you watch that movie and you're like, yeah, this is Dynasty Warriors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Picturing that as a film. All right, all right. Above or below Highlander? Let's use Highlander as the base.
That's a different context, though, right?
Yeah.
Like
You
you
got
got
to
to say
use it as a base.
there's great films, there's
Yeah,
flicks,
and
and then there's like
enjoyable.
movies, right?
Yeah.
And this
Right.
is like
So
a flick,
where does it fall
whereas
between
Highlander's a movie.
where does it fall between Highlander and Highlander 2?
What do
It's
you mean? They never made a second Highlander movie.
Oh, nine ball. No, I know obviously you should know that, but man, if you didn't, you have a world of hurt in for you.
The
I would put
I hate that I have to explain it, but we don't talk about the second Highlander movie. We
it doesn't
act as if it
exist.
never got made. They just, for whatever reason, they went from Highlander 1 to Highlander 3.
The amount of
Um,
It's very
Highlander films
strange.
that exist just bothers me.
yeah,
Like, oh, they're just another guy. Anyways, this is a
It's tough.
different podcast at this point. But Highlander is related to combat, so we'll call it even. Um, right? Uh, any last thoughts
yeah,
on
yeah.
combat?
That's yeah, no, that was a
No.
reach.
Okay.
No,
Third words, you got something?
well, my thought is it has nothing to do. We can go right back to being on track. Is the Dynasty Warriors movie really falls more in line with a movie like Velocipaster? If you've ever seen Velocipaster, I would put it in that category. Great movies, but for different reasons than movies are
Mhm.
typically great.
Okay. Okay.
I would rank it between like Crank 2 and
Yeah.
Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance.
Oh, that's great. That's great. That's a
Yeah,
great scale.
Where
yeah.
does Hobo with a Shotgun fall?
I don't think I've seen that one.
That's a
What?
great movie.
Yeah,
Oh, Rutger Hauer at his best. Hobo with a Shotgun. Uh,
I'll write that one
if
down.
you see one film about a hobo with a shotgun, make it Hobo with a Shotgun. That's it. There's the tagline. Write that down. Uh, I'm impressed that I was able to listen because you haven't seen that.
They're out there. They're
Yeah,
out there.
bound to happen.
Yeah.
I don't even know where it's streaming. It was on Netflix like years ago. So of course I had to watch it. Um, okay, so we're talking more about Netflix and movies at this point. This is what happens when our Diablo news is coming just from one source. We need more. We need more. And we're going into a dry time. It's gonna be so dry. Uh, we'll get there. We'll get there. All right, so a nice transition from combat is the open world, right? We have been told, and we heard in the video that like it's going to be open, but it's not going to be that kind of open, right? That you should be able to expect combat happening constantly, not like Zelda or well Breath of the Wild or like Elden Ring, where you have these vast stretches and you just can just explore that combat is going to be kind of integral to what the open world actually is. And I, for one, you get some brief views of the map, right? And the the scope of this game seems way larger than what I was expecting. Um, where I think it's going to be pretty big, and that to me seems exciting, right? Like being able to go and explore a multitude of places as opposed to like being hamstrung to just a few of them in D2 or D3. um, that seems pretty cool, and they do make the mention of like being able to kind of go off the rails when it comes to doing the story. They mentioned that there is a crux right away that you then choose, and you might go and do act 2 or act 1 or any other combination that you want. That too sounds exciting as somebody who ends up playing through the story a few times, because I die. Uh, Being able to kind of jump around is exciting. What were your guys' thoughts when we were getting this information on open world?
I
So
mean, it definitely sounded like MMO light. A couple of years ago, I had went and put together from as we had screenshots of the demo from 2019, and they had done one of the developer blogs that gave like an overview of a test like a full systems test that they had done in the dry steppes. And I was superimposed like those like maps onto like the world map that we had seen, and it was like this is like the size. It literally was like the size of an MMO. Like it was like the map and everything was just gigantic. Like you could spend hours just running around, from like one end of it to the other, based on like the scope of what we had played in 2019 and like that little portion of the map that we had, and then like the giant section from the dry steps of that developer blog, and then the whole rest of the map that was sitting there. And so that really excites me of being able to go through, and it's like there's going to be a lot out there. There's going to be places and cities and all the other types of stuff. For me, from a like a lore and story perspective, of just being able to like walk out there and like talk to people. Like, is it going to be set up similar to like other MMOs where they'll just be side quests and stuff like that are out there as opposed to just having to follow the main story. And not to mention, I'm intrigued about how they're going to do the main story of the game, since they've said it's going to be non-linear and that you can choose your own adventure style thing, about how those different story elements will all tie into one overarching narrative. Because as we've seen in all the other previous Diablo games, it's a very linear story of how the things go through, and you have to encounter XYZ before you do this for the story to make sense, and what those elements, or what kind of like the pacing changes that they'll make in Diablo 4 to make a non-linear story still have a cohesive impact. Because a lot of times when other companies have done non-linear stories, it's always like these little aspects and such don't really matter at the end of the day, and so you have like A and then B, C, D don't really matter. You can do them in any order, and the only actual like story point is like point E. And how they might end up doing that. Is that like what we're gonna get, and the non-linear story kind of like falls flat just to make it have the ability of being non-linear, or might have we been better off actually having like a linear storyline for those that care about story?
Well, and I think that you bring up a really good point, Nineball, because it's based on that alone, this game will be completely different than any Diablo game we've played so far, right? Like the way the story is going to be told isn't going to be linear. Being that you'll be able to do different zones at different times tells me that obviously there'll be objectives in those zones, but they'll have their own condensed story in those zones that connect to the bigger picture, which is a very different way to tell a Diablo story. I still think it could be done at a very high level and be great. I mean, they have great writers on their teams, but it will be different, and I think that's something important, and it'll be something important to acknowledge as a fan, going into it, because I like a lot of other kind of games too. But this storytelling device will be very different, and I want to see. I think as long as that open world, they talk about it in the video about the density and stuff too. We're talking about time to kill and the combat and all that stuff too. Well, time through a zone also matters too. Like, does it feel like maybe there's too much or maybe there's too little? Again, it seems like they've really gone through the checklist of all the things that people could possibly be afraid of or worried about, and they're just like, no, we've thought about this, right? We're thinking about this, we're planning for this, which is really good. It shows a very intentional marketing campaign and a very intentional conversation. But I am intrigued by that Nineball, because again, I think it will change the story. But the open world, we've never been able to roam Sanctuary, right? Not really. Yeah. Like Diablo 2, Diablo 3, there's zones you can go play in, but I mean they're little zones and they're very capped and straightforward.
And they're not connected.
Right, but the ability to just go out into the world and go check out different spots in Kyrgyzstan and to, I mean, eventually through time they could add more zones, more continents, more things, to the map, just like they've done in World of Warcraft and other games as well too. So there's so much they can do that really just depends on kind of where the game goes once it becomes a service and ships.
Mm-hmm.
I think you brought up some interesting points, Nimeball, about the way the story will be told. I did get a sense that eventually you're going to be pushed in that direction, right? Like you're going to reach a cap at some point and be like, okay, now I have to do this. Because they did talk a little bit about bringing in, some of the people from various open world games, and they're essentially saying that, like we can give them options, but they need a straight line. They need to know, where they need to go, and they did make particular mention of like, okay, you'll probably get distracted by doing a bunch of side quests. But then you're going to come back. You're going to come back because you need to do this to get to whatever else might be happening.
Well, and that's a good point, Xanth, because think of any game you've played. Like you could play the main story and you get the story, but it's the side quests that really fill out the meat of the zone of the world of whatever you're playing through, right? I don't care if you're playing Assassin's Creed, World of Warcraft, or Diablo. Diablo 1, Diablo 2, Diablo 3, their quests were very, here's a quest, go do it, and that's it, right? That's really the whole game was the quest. All the side quests were just the quests you skipped because you didn't care to do them, but they're actually part of the main story technically. And Diablo 3 was very much the same too. This is going to have that main quest, but I mean, with us having an open world to explore, I would imagine there's going to be a lot of like little side quests that fill out the world and let you meet little side characters and NPCs, and a woman from Skovos, that's stranded in Kyrgyzstan. You got to say, there's just little things that we're going to find we've never been able to find, and that's, I think, the most exciting thing about this is just the amount is going to expand upon what we know about Sanctuary is really cool.
It's going to make it a living, breathing place.
Yeah.
And I imagine on the journey from 1 to 50 or 1 to 100, Nineball, you're going to be spending I can't imagine how many hours just doing every possible side quest you possibly can do and talking to every person in every town along the way, um, just to get all of that juicy
He's
lore.
not the only one. It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know what I will do. I
You're going to play a druid. That's what you're going to do.
Yeah, that I do know. Um, um, I'm very excited for the story, but I also like would probably, I don't know. I have a hard time, and it was hard during D3's release of slowing down. Just want to like keep going and go a little bit faster. Um, like who am I competing with? I'm not that good. Uh,
Yeah.
like
I
what
mean,
do I do?
that's one of the great things of Diablo 2 is that every kind of like step of the quests, everybody's like gossip changes. Everyone has input as to what's going on in the world. That's how Diablo 2 made the world feel a little bit more lived in, is because as you progress through things, it changed what everybody had to say. Everybody, not just like, where's the arcane sanctuary when you go through and you talk to Lysander and such. But it's like, as you progress through, their gossip changes as they tell you about the other characters, that are there, with Faye being a former paladin, all that other types of stuff. So there's like a lot that can be learned out there. And I'm Diablo 3 didn't have it quite as much. Obviously, you had, the vendors and your like the blacksmith and such, where they had cohesive storylines that you could follow through and talking with them, but the regular townsfolk was far more limited. There was Kayla in Act 2, which I had mentioned in a previous episode, one of my favorites, her little poem at the end as you follow her story. But then there's like, the tavern in Act 1 as you progress through the game, and kind of like that's it. There wasn't too much to go through and get gossip in D3. So I'm looking forward to D4 having a lot of uh, potential points of going and talking to dozens of people, whether it just be side quests or even just listening to people talk in town to get a feel for what the world is like.
Yeah, I think there is, and Nerdboards, you brought it up too, like this, the ability to explore a sanctuary that we've never been able to do, right? It's always been on rails. We've always had to just follow, and to kind of explore that seems really cool. And I think I know I had talked about it a while ago, off podcast, but like when World of Warcraft first came out, uh, I one played it, but I wanted it to be Diablo. Like I wanted to be able to like go and explore places in Diablo like I was doing in WoW. Now, I didn't want that camera angle um or that set of graphics, but like that's what I wanted. And so to be able to maybe get out and do that and like actually be able to explore places and like that's fucking awesome. Like I'm all for it. Um I'm really trying to get rid of that clean tag on Apple. So a couple F-bombs here and there, that'll do it.
Nice. Nice.
I think. I don't know. So as we were discussing my plans for release, I will go Druid. I don't think there's much that will deter me from that. Um, we did get another video about the classes, making them feel unique to themselves, a little bit about skills as well. Um, so we did get to see, and at this moment, we know all the class mechanics except for one, right? We know Necromancer's got Book of the Dead,
Book of the Dead, the Necronomicon Ex Mortis.
as it should be. Uh, Barbarian has the Arsenal system, right?
Praise Crom.
Rogue has some rogue stuff. Uh, Sorceress has
The enchanting system.
the enchanting system. And what does the Druid have, gentlemen? We don't
A plucky attitude
know.
and probably fleas.
Yeah,
And
probably fleece for sure.
um, we don't know. They did spend a decent amount of time in this video, like highlighting a few of those class mechanics and how they want them to make each class feel a little different by the choices that you get to make. Um, so uh, I can only assume that they are making the Druid the coolest one, and they want to highlight it in promotional materials to get people hyped to buy the game, right? That's the logic.
Totally. Yeah, it's got to be it.
Like, oh man, this one's so cool. We have to hold back and not tell anybody anything, despite announcing the class at launch, which, you know, courtesy of Jay Wilson and Nine Bald Memory, we do know that just because it was announced doesn't mean they're working on it right away. Um, which I don't understand because it's clearly the coolest class, but bias. So, you're
Well,
not sure
as
whether
they say, there cannot be despair without hope.
that's true. That's true. So I'm gonna tell you my dream druid class mechanic, and then we'll go into other stuff. Um, I want to be
Is it
able to
fleas?
fleas would be cool. Maybe if so maybe there's a different type of specialization, like you get to lean more into shifting. So maybe there's new shifting stuff, right? And then yeah, this is why I'm not working at Blizzard. Like new shifting stuff. Write that down, somebody. Um, and then like I feel like looking at what the sorceress can do, and looking at the necromancer, just we can see the druid's playstyle breaks into shifting, elemental spells, and pets. So why not have a way to kind of fluctuate on that, right? Um, more pets. If we're talking about class specifics, like they had mentioned before, my druid is different than your druid because I have a bunch of wolves or ferrets or something. See, write that down. Ferrets. We could
This
do
man
that.
wants to make a zoo druid work so bad
Oh
already.
man, that'd be
We haven't
so
even got the
cool.
game yet.
It took a long time for it to happen in Diablo too. Um,
I mean, I guess technically it's still waiting to happen in
Right.
Diablo 2.
It really is.
it's
Yeah,
you can make it work. It's not awful.
work.
It's not
Yeah.
an awful build. It's actually pretty good for hardcore. Um, it'll get you there. It'll get you there.
What, to Nightmare?
Yeah. You can get to hell on a zoo druid.
No, I've seen some zoo druids holding it down for sure,
It
but the
got a
fact
lot
that
better in the most recent patch. Um, anyways, with your druid slander, we will move on to your discussion around the lesser classes. I
fair.
like how
And
we
here
have
I
this.
just here I thought that you were gonna say like the druid class abilities was changing it up between like fleas and mites and ticks. You could have your
That's good.
choice of
That's
whichever
good.
one that you
There
wanted.
should be there should be a legendary muzzle.
Yeah.
I would have thought
Mhm.
that you would say something to the effect of like its class mechanic is choosing a different one. Um, that's what's
uh,
built in.
Good.
You get
Good.
to you leveled whatever it is, and you get to roll a different class because it sucks. Um, no, that won't be it. I'm sure we'll find out at some point. So class specifics though, and this whole concept of making classes feel different, right? Um, the classes that you guys like were highlighted. What were some of your thoughts coming around like what we saw with the Necromancer there, Nineball?
I mean, like just the class mechanic being called Book of the Dead is a great thing for me. I'm a huge Evil Dead fan. So that's just I love that little thing right there. But it's interesting because they really talked about how the Necromancer was so iconic for having like the pet abilities, and then Diablo 3 kind of shifted that away to being a little bit more like active management, and that they want to build upon those archetypes while also being able to just say go it alone. No minions, have like the Darkcaster archetype where you can really like funnel in your abilities, because as we saw in the Book of the Dead, you can sacrifice your pets to gain power. Whereas like with Diablo 3 or Diablo 2, you're just not taking a pet. In Diablo 4, it's like the core mechanic. And so you're forced into taking the pets unless you go through and you use the Book of the Dead to sacrifice it, which then gives you various buffs depending upon which ones you have sacrificed. You don't have to you could take just mages and sacrifice your skeletons and your golem, or you could sacrifice like the golem and keep both the mages and the skeletons. You have all those abilities to do it. It would be nice to know what all of the various choices are with those sacrifice mechanics to see what you could do. But I definitely enjoy the fact that they're nailing the tone and expanding the gameplay. Your options.
Yeah, I don't know if the enchant system for sorceress really expands the tone at all. It's cool. It's definitely interesting. Essentially, you get to equip 2 skills to an enchant bar. Well, one skill at a level, and then another skill to think at another level. I imagine like there's one. It seemed like it was locked in the stills, but it seems like you're going to be kind of going into avenues where you're enchanting the same skills you're using anyways, right? Like, so if you want to be a chain lightning sorcerer, you're probably going to enchant chain lightning because it's going to give something special to the chain lightning effect when you use it, right? So I think it's cool. It is interesting, but I don't think it's like crazy groundbreaking or anything that's like necessarily enhancing the class fantasy, but it would really determine on how you select those or what the module looks like. Like if I actually have to go to like a city or like some sort of like alcave and like have them enchant me and I look different, then that'd be cool. But if it's just like a button I'm clicking, then I'm just clicking a button. So that's cool.
So it seems like there was a big focus on this, and it's like this is kind of 2 or 3 parts that we'll cover on, but like the concept of not having as much of a clear-cut meta seemed to be a focus of um, like having a big difference. Am I misinterpreting that, or did that come across as like they would like to not have as much of a cookie cutter build system?
There's always going to be something that's most efficient.
Right.
That just
Yeah,
at
that's
the end of the
exactly.
day,
It's
yeah,
a waste of breath, is all I heard. It's just a waste of
yeah.
breath. Like it's going to happen. Like, yeah.
This is something I've talked about to great lengths in the past. That it really comes down to like one of the biggest differences between Diablo 2 and Diablo 3 is that Diablo 2's difficulty level stops here, and Greater Rift 150 stops up here.
Yeah.
So whereas with Diablo 2, 80% you could fumble a bad build and make it to hell, and
Yep.
chances are you probably beat hell. Obviously you have better resources to go through and do it faster, do it more efficiently. But in Diablo 3, you know, there's a very few that will reach this level, solo. You going into the group metas, you can make it a little bit more viable, but it's like it pushed the difficulty way too far. And so Diablo 3's emphasis on what's meta, what's not, was more spawned from the difficulty that people were going to try and play or defeat than the actual interbalance between all of the skills, abilities, and sets and such. So I think in Diablo 4, I would appreciate it if, maybe they found a little bit of a middle ground, so to speak. And so that way you just had more variety. And so, sure, there will be, you're going to have what is it? The Aegis Crusaders, your, teleporting Hammerdins, your Magic Find Sorceresses, your Rat Run Necromancers and such. those are all still going to exist, but
Can the Zoo Druid also do something too? Because then Xanth will be happy.
then Xantha will be happy. He gets to equip both his mites and his fleas at the same
There you
time.
go.
He gets to
Yeah,
hang out
But
in
I
Act
agree.
1, watching
yeah,
everybody else drop gold in front of him.
but yeah,
So
no, it's so it definitely I think that is like there's meta and then there's like meta, and like using the term meta in Diablo 2 is a lot different from saying what the meta is in Diablo 3.
yeah.
Diablo 2 gives you a lot more open variety just because it has a flat difficulty. And
Well,
so if sorry, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say also online gaming has changed a lot of like. It's amazing to me that developers can still say this with a straight face or expect anyone to take it as anything other than just conjecture, because
Yeah.
the game will have theory crafting in place for about 3.5 hours. And then in trade chat, just like happened in World of Warcraft when it launched, people are like, "Hey, when you hit level 20, where'd you put your skill points for a Frost Sorceress?" Right? Like, people are always going to want the best answer, not because they don't want to theory craft themselves. Maybe they can't theory craft themselves. Maybe they don't want to spend the time thinking about it. Maybe they just want to not be bad. The problem with online gaming is you're playing with other people, so you're judged for your play and your build, right? So people are always going to want the best of the best, which means people are going to funnel into cookie cutter builds in certain regards. Now, again, like Nineball said, the goal should be to have as much variety and interesting choices that are viable through the early, mid, and end game. But it really depends on how the end game systems scale, because again, like Nineball said, infinite scaling limits the number of builds that are going to be able to do that limitless scale. Whereas having a cap of the game hit really, if for the sake of the level cap's 100, right, in D4. So like
I
at
think so.
80, right, if everything is like nothing higher than level 85, like in Diablo 2, then a lot of things will be able to get there. It's going to get there. So it's just like everything else they've said so far. It is the right thing to say. It is absolutely what they should say. It's mind blowing to me that developers still say this with a straight face in 2022. And it's all about how they execute it.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that execution will be Paragon boards. So another part, so there are two last parts kind of in this. We're looking at Paragon boards and we're looking at respecs, right? Which interesting in of itself. But first, let's go to Paragon boards. This is the part that I am probably most excited for, right? This kind of post leveling. I mean, obviously you're still going from 50 to 100, but this way to deviate your build a little bit. Um, I feel like this is the place that has the most promise for Diablo 4, like in terms of like how many boards are out there? Do you find boards from different dungeons? I don't know. Um, but it is the place that seems to have the most promise. I would hate if the boards were uh, behind dungeons, like but I don't know. I need time to think about that one. But anyways, Paragon boards. What are your thoughts based on what they were able to kind of give us here, Nimble?
Yep. They it's like this is kind of like the not necessarily like the sphere grid of Path of Exile, but this is what your in-game progression is you're slowly going through getting these Paragon points, and you're filling in like this massive collage of little tiny squares across the boards, but they all give you individual power boosts, and there's even like different rarities. So there's kind of like a direction that you are kind of like led to on the boards themselves about where you want to go through, put your points to those like rare nodes and such that are going to give you your bigger power boosts. I guess it kind of like goes into one of the things that they were talking about earlier in like that same video or that same interview where they're talking about depth without complexity. They're two actual different things. You can get depth with complexity and making things like super esoteric and such. But the Paragon boards, where it's like the more that I look at it, the more it makes sense. Like I can understand it. There's depth in there because there's a whole bunch of different boards that you can choose, and you can change their orientations about how they're connected together. And so there's an efficiency that you can do to take your various paths to get whatever nodes that you might need. But it's easy to understand once you kind of like grasp the concept, and it doesn't feel as if it's going to have to take like college level calculus or something to try and figure out the sphere grids. Like I'm sure the sphere grids, for anybody that's played Path of Exile for an extended period of time, for them it clicks and you understand what all of that is, but it's a lot harder to get there, and then you end up with I'm just going to go online and find a build.
Yeah, the learning curve is pretty steep on those, right? And so I think that's really what they're speaking to here is they've got to find the right give and take and the right learning curve to make it compelling without making it obnoxious. And that's again the right thing to say. Let's see how it's executed. I think that I definitely am apprehensive about Paragon Boards. I've talked about it before. I think that it's hard to make those choices really interesting. And again, like I will literally bet anybody $100 that we're going to have builds in 2 days once the game's launched that show us what our Paragon boards are supposed to be, regardless of what they say, right? Regardless of what they think, right? It's going to happen.
Well, we what was it? We're all looking forward to that open beta. There's going to be guides on what to do before the game launches. Let's be serious here.
Right? Yeah.
Whether they're accurate or not, going through and looking at some of the guides that were out like before Diablo Immortal, where things changed greatly. We'll see how accurate they'll be, but they'll be out there. But no, I mean, you do make I guess we're both making the same point that it's like, I guess to go and build upon the point that you made in our previous topic, the internet exists. It's like any type. People don't want to make wrong choices. There are those people that just want to be able to make choices for themselves, but the majority of the time, people don't want to make something that's perceived as wrong, and so they're going to go online. They're going to look up a guide, and then you have a meta. I guess it really will depend on how engaging it is, and also I guess how like thematic they are. Do we all use the same Paragon boards, or like do I as a necromancer have one that's just like dedicated towards like a golem, or do I have a board that's dedicated towards like pets versus you having one that's dedicated towards like cold skills, and such. Right. So.
Yeah, it just depends on how they execute it. With all of these things, it's the right things to say. They've got the right things in mind. We'll just see how it's executed. I hope it's great, right? And either way, I'm going to try it out like endlessly, but I really want it to be great. So,
and also going into that, talking about respecs. What they mentioned in the interview that you can respec for gold, and that it will scale over time. That was something that going back and looking at World of Warcraft. Where like in World of Warcraft, Classic, it got ridiculously expensive in order to go through and respec your character. Like it was something that was actually limiting. Like you had to go through and forego like I have to farm an extra like couple hours this week because I need to respec. But I also still need, all of my elixirs and other things like that. Like, what other uses do we have for gold? Is it only for respecs, or is there going to be like is the crafting system going to be sufficient enough to also make us want to put gold into there? Is it more efficient for me to just farm gold and respec, or is it more efficient for me to just roll a second necromancer if I want to try something other than a pet build? So those are some of the ones that I'm not quite sure where I sit. If you had asked me this question a couple of years ago, I would have said I wouldn't mind an expensive respecking system, because it helps with the class identity of wanting to go through. And it's like I'm playing a pet necromancer, and so maybe I can respec a couple of these things to change how I'm playing as a pet necro. But I want it to be a very limiting to like completely switch gears and go to something else like a blood build or a bone build. But current me that has a lot more limited time for going through and playing games, I don't look at the prospect of having to level an entirely new character just to play a different class, or just not to play a different class, but to play a different build of the same class, isn't as enticing. So I hope that there's a balance there that I can, choose to change things up, maybe every once in a while and not have to wait till a new season to play a different type of build.
Well, and I would think the reason why this is kind of tricky for all of us is that none of us have the answer either, right? Like, I think all of us would agree that the Diablo 3, talent system, while good, felt like there was no real weight to your choice because you could change whatever you want to. I like that aspect because it felt almost like arcadey. I could kind of check this skill out, check this thing out, and rock and roll. Oh, don't like that, back to town, switch it up, go back in, whatever, right? I like that because it allowed me to test and build and really try different things that I liked. But at the same time, like, I've also played Diablo 3 now forever. Diablo 2, right? You have a limited number of respecs, and then you can farm specific items to be able to respec later, which I think is a good system. And typically, but again, I've played Diablo 2 for 20 years. If I was playing Diablo 2 for the first time right now, how would I feel about that system? Right?
Yeah.
So that's tricky. So like it's almost like I'm saying, hey, maybe just let us respec as much as we want for the first 6 months the game's out, and then make it like dumb expensive. Otherwise, I'm sure they'll figure it out. But the honest truth is, I don't think anyone's got the perfect formula yet.
They do mention in the interview that like early on, like your early levels, that you will have like much cheaper respecs, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
Yeah.
so
Which is great. So you can try stuff out early. But I mean, but think about Diablo 2. So I'm trying out Ice Bolt, Charge Bolt, Firebolt. Is that really interesting? Right? Am I really going to be spending that much time switching between those things? Builds really come into fruition when they've got a few synergies and a few things kind of working with them. So we'll see how it is in the mid game when you're 20, 30, 40, right? And then what it's like at 80, 90, 100. So we'll see how it goes. I'm not a fan of creating alts. But then that aspect also is determined by how interesting or fun is the leveling experience. I actually love leveling in Diablo 2. I could literally just do that and not even do a lot of the end game grind stuff because I have a lot of fun just playing the game. So I think there's something said for that, but it just depends on a lot of different circumstances. And again, there's not a game out there. I don't think anyone can name maybe some of your favorites, but I don't think any game's got it perfect.
no, and like thinking about, you're absolutely right when it comes to D2. Like you've played enough that you know the builds that 3 respecs doesn't
It's
seem like
plenty.
it's like
Yeah.
yeah, I'll use like one and I'm gonna be okay. Um, and then D3, the flip side, you don't have to because you can always just change.
Yeah.
So like that middle ground,
It's
I like the thought of gold having value for multiple things.
I do too, actually. I'm really
yeah.
excited about that.
If respecs are it, and I'd imagine gold to be tied to other things, but if at least respecs are making gold valuable, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
And especially as somebody who's going to die and lose a lot of gold anyway. Um, my respec is death.
All
So,
those dead
Yeah.
zoo druids.
Yeah. One of the things that I wonder is how this plays in, because it feels like there's like kind of like a no-win situation there, because if you have free respecs like you do in Diablo 3, then if you ever try to group or do public games and stuff like that, everyone's going to be like, why aren't you spec this specific way? Kick.
Yep.
You have to follow what it is, because you can freely respect anything, so you have to play exactly what everyone else is playing. But then on the flip side, when you go back to like World of Warcraft, like the early days of World of Warcraft, when respecking, because in current WoW, it is just click a button and things change. But when you go back, there would be times that it's like, oh, you're not playing a Destruction Warlock? Oh, goodbye. It's like,
It's still like
we're not
that.
even,
It's still like that.
So it definitely is one of those ones where it's like, I don't know how you win for the tribal psychology of things, because if you make respecking more limited, then if someone does go down a different path, they are gonna they're gonna encounter the negative aspects of people not wanting to invite them to meta groups or meta farming or whatever shape or form that might take. Um, and then they have no avenue of correcting it besides like rolling a new character.
So what you're saying is people need better friends. So,
Yes.
We
join
all do.
the Pure
Yeah.
Diablo community, which will be happy to not be jerks. Actually, we might be even worse. I don't know. Um,
We will definitely shame you if you play a druid. Apparently.
you're gonna get a lot of
100%.
that. A lot of that. So,
I don't think quite as much as you think.
um, so as we kind of continue on, we covered a lot there. There are two last points. I mean, first, it's world tiers. Um, you know, we're treated to some information about the different tiers and bosses gating you behind, or bosses gating the different difficulties that we're going to encounter. Um, we are told multiple modes. We got two of them right from the start. Um, and mode two is not Nightmare, which again is weird. Uh, it should be Nightmare. Like, why isn't? But okay, fine. Okay, fine. It's not. But we are told our five levels of difficulty here, and that they are locked. Thoughts on that? Is gating a good system for this difficulty?
Having done a podcast for many years, I can say I look forward to never having to answer the question of when do you think I can do Torment 6? What Paragon level should I have to do Torment
You
6?
must be Paragon
Uh,
1000 to get into Torment 6. For anyone
yeah,
listening
so
right now, you must be.
yeah. So the just the fact that it's gonna be kind of like have like a boss that gates it so you can't even access it till you complete a milestone is that's just great because it communicates information to the player. It's like I can't beat this boss, so that means I'm not ready for that difficulty, or I was able to beat the boss, so that means I am ready in order to go through and take that difficulty. That to me is just it's a great way of communicating information as opposed to stop here. You must be this tall to enter the ride.
It's also par for the course, right? Every Diablo game, when you go to the new difficulty, you must defeat Diablo on normal to get to Nightmare, to get to Hell in Diablo 1 and Diablo 2. You have to get through Diablo, then Baal, right? On normal Nightmare to get to Hell. So Diablo 3 kind of changed that with the way the difficulty system worked a little bit. I don't think it was a bad thing though. I will tell you though, I was vocally like against adding Torments 10, let alone 13 to 16. But I can't imagine that game without those now, right?
Yeah.
So I've been wrong on this in the past. I think
Again, it's a symptom of the infinite scaling difficulties
right,
and stuff.
right.
Yeah.
Like, remember, there was a time where Torment 6 was the highest, right? And I was like,
Um,
they don't need to add Torment 10. Why add Torment 10? That's stupid. That's dumb. Whatever. And then they did, and then they added 13, and then they added 16. But again, I can't imagine not doing Torment 16 rifts because Jesus, like that's like the whole lifeblood of what you do. Really, it's a certain point.
mhm.
So I think it's par for the course. But I would also argue though that beating that boss does not mean you're beating Nightmare Bale does not mean you are ready for hell. And I'm sorry,
Yeah, yeah.
So we'll see. It really depends on how that works, right? I would like to see that boss be a bigger scale or like really a step up to difficulty from what you've been doing in some form or facet, whether it's affixing or
At least
whatever.
make like at least make the boss a true
A
test.
boss, right? Like, yeah,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
not some end of dungeon boss that you and your friends can knock down in 35 seconds, right? Like make it something interesting, something challenging, and something that isn't like, oh, dodge this thing, oh, didn't dodge it, you lost, right? Like something
yeah.
that's actually interesting and engaging. That really shows you the level of difficulty you're stepping into. I think that would be really cool. But again, great methodology, par for the course for a Diablo game. How they execute it is really going to depend on how it turns out. So
And it should be called Nightmare. Okay, good. Um,
yes, yes.
then the last part is the game is a live service, right? Um, I like that they were a little reticent to commit to 3 months, right? I think that's fine. I think coming out of the gate and saying we're going to be updating, we're going to be adding every 3 months is an undue burden on everyone right away. I'd be fine to for them to even take like let the game release for a little bit and then let's talk about what's going to happen in the cycle. And I understand that might be harder to do because you want to sell more copies. Um, but like Path of Exile is the one that has the 3 month release cycle, and it while they have been able to do it, it does create off leagues, right? If you have too much pressure to make something in a short time, um, you get these leagues that just don't feel as satisfying, and then you're hesitant to kind of return back to it, or they have to spend 2 to 3 weeks trying to fix it to make sure that it works well, which then takes away from development of the next league. Um, Honestly, I would like a 4 month cycle. I don't know how you guys feel. I feel like 4 months, it I understand you could get one more in there, but it does it to me it just would feel better. Um and
I
you
can
could
tell you
have
this: I don't know what's better, 3 or 4 months, but I know that 1 month is too short. That's what stopped me playing Immortal because I was like, I can't a month for a
Yeah.
season. Like I have a job and like a family and like somewhat of a life. I can't. It's a lot, right? I think 3 or 4 months sounds fine, but it's hard to know what the perfect time frame is.
It really will come down to the amount of content and how long it takes in order to go through and like complete your character and move on to the end game, whatever, in game activities, or, as you were mentioning, Xanth, like what type of engagement the season bonus actually like gives you and such. Because we've seen with Diablo 3 that they're definitely, on its kind of like 3 to 4 month schedule, it can be really engaging seasons that actually keep you playing for weeks at a time, where other ones are fall a little bit flat, and so you'll finish up your season journey in a week, and then you wait for the next one. If is there going to be enough in Diablo 4 to keep us engaged for that entire 3 months? Are we going to play it for a month? Is our playtime for every season going to be measured in days, weeks, or months? Is going to be one of those big ones, and just the amount of content, how much they're going to engage. I wouldn't mind a 6 month season if there's enough content in there that keeps me playing it for like 3 or 4 months straight, as opposed to 3 month seasons that really only gives me content for 1 month,
Well,
going through and playing.
and that's what I brought up before when we kind of talked about our thoughts and feelings on Diablo 4
Yeah.
was like while I do appreciate that they're looking at it as a live service, it's actually the interview with Jay Wilson blew my mind that they were like working on it as a box game, not thinking about. I was like, how? Like
Yeah.
everyone's played Diablo 2 for a decade at that point, right? How did you anyway, whatever. That's crazy to me. So it is good that they've shifted that thinking and they are thinking about Diablo like that. And also for all of us, fucking finally, right? Good, right? It's not just a box game. It being thought about as a live service means it's going to get iteration, it's going to get lore, it's going to get content, it's going to get stuff. They're already thinking about that. That's good. My trepidation was make the core game great so that I'm not worried about that yet. That was kind of the point that I made before was like I want the core content to be so good, kind of like what Nineball's saying. Like I don't want to like get the game and be like, okay, when's the next season start in like a month, right? I want to play that game as it is for 6 months, a year.
Mm-hmm.
Before I'm really worried about diving into a season and starting fresh. Like let me really digest the world and the character and make the gameplay loop interesting enough to do that.
I think they mentioned, they kind of like touch on that topic a little bit because they do talk about the challenges of that the game should feel rich and be able to stand on its own, without the live service aspect of it. But they also at the same time they can't really commit to anything as far as the cadence because it is difficult for them to develop the game in a shippable form, as well as begin to start also developing those live service things that are going to go through and come later. Like where do they find like the balancing act on that one between, okay, we stop ship here and then we start working on season 1.
Yeah. No, and again, it's good to hear that they're being transparent about that. I think it's a
Yeah.
very good thing. And again, as a Diablo fan since 1994, 4, 5, 6, somewhere around in that area. Yay! We're finally talking about Diablo as a live service. It's not the redheaded stepchild. We'll holding out hope. Hopefully, it's not 13 years till Diablo 5. We'll see. But for me, I think that like the biggest thing that going through all of this really highlights to me is this is going to be a very different game, right? Like it's
Mhm.
developed, but they're also developing it. Like the development team is completely different from the previous Diablo 2 development teams, right? The production company is completely different. Like Activision's different than it was when it put out Diablo 3, way different than it was than Blizzard was when it put out Diablo 2 and Diablo 1. So that's going to be vastly different. The marketing campaign is going to be vastly different with people like Rod Ferguson, who led Gears of War, which is a very, very big franchise and was for a long time for Microsoft. That's going to be very different. How the game plays is going to be different because of the open world and the almost MMO-like setting, the non-linear storytelling. Like everything about this game will be very different. And I think that, like, as an old school Diablo fan, that's cool in the sense that it's going to try. They're trying to pull in other markets and other people, right? Like I want my kid, right, and his friends to be excited about Diablo 4. I'm excited about Diablo 4, but they've really got the challenge of how do you get the WoW player, the old school Diablo 1 and Diablo 2 player, the Diablo 3 exclusively player, the Diablo Immortal player, right?
The
How do they
Path
get
of Exile player.
right, but then
You
also
know?
like the Fortnite kids, the Apex kids, the Call of Duty players, like how do they get everyone brought into this? And it seems like they're trying to find those happy mediums that make the most sense for a Diablo game. I just my only worry is I hope it feels like a Diablo game. It looks great. They're saying all the right stuff. I just, as an old school Diablo fan, I'm going to play this game regardless, right? I'm going to soak it up and drink it in and suffer through any nonsense and wait for patches, right? But at the end of the day, I just want the game to be great so that I'm not chasing a season, right? I don't. If the game launches on time, we're supposed to see it in the next 8 months at least, right? Um, I don't want to be talking about a year from now. When's the season coming? Like I want to still
Um,
be engaged and excited about the game. So, and I think that they can achieve that. Diablo 2 and Diablo 3. It took some time before those became implemented. So we'll see how it plays out.
which is also like like the one of the very difficult things that any developer making an ARPG nowadays is that you have a brand new game with a specific budget and a time frame in order to make it that has to compete with Diablo 3 or Diablo 2 with years and patches of content, Path of Exile. The GGG is going to have the same exact issue with Path of Exile 2.
Yep.
They're going to have to release something that at least is competitive with the decades worth of content in Path of Exile 1. And
Well,
so it's definitely one of those things that's just like you got a lot to live up to, but you'll never be able to reach that. But you have to have a good solid base mechanically to then build upon in order to surpass it at some point.
Well, and you've also got the fact that like the market really dictates how the game's going to go too, right? We're talking about the combat, the time to kill, and how they want it to be intentional and not completely frenetic, right? But it's going to ramp up. Well, Path of Exile started out that way, right? But
Yeah.
because of Diablo 3 and what Diablo 3 had really ramped up just the crazy amounts of things happening and the kill speeds, Path kind of saw that shift too. And you can't say that the two aren't related to each other. Right, there had to have been some sort of, oh hey, they're doing this and it's working for them. Let's see if we can plug in a little more freneticism. So again, it depends on what Path 2 does. It depends on what Torchlight Infinite does. Like it depends on what these other games that are going to come out are going to do too. And honestly, if they're a more compelling product. So the good news is the Diablo 4 is the flagship, right? It is the ARPG. So I think it's got an advantage in that regard. But I just, again, for me, they've got all the right things in mind. They're saying the right stuff. I hope it is executed as well as they're speaking about it.
No.
I think the one part that they do bring up as well when they're talking about live service that I really was excited about is the for a new season, introducing new skills, introducing new Paragon boards, stuff that we have typically only seen in an expansion, right? Like a new
Mm.
skill in a Diablo game only comes in an expansion. So to have those options like being kind of teased out, and if that does come to fruition, like a new way to play that zoo druid, those ferrets getting added in, um, finally, uh, that would be awesome. I am 100% about that, and not having to wait, 2, 3 years for an expansion, or whatever that might be. And they did also still talk about expansions too, like the difference between running a live service and having an expansion. Um, so, down the road, that also will be a possibility. I know the way Path ends up doing it is, like they have their three smaller leagues, and then they usually have one larger expansion league at the beginning of the year, where they'll add in a little bit more story, or they'll change up the mapping system and stuff like that. Um, so that's always exciting when you get the big patch, right? Um, I don't necessarily know if I need that for Diablo, but I don't know. I'm not as opposed to it either.
Yeah. No, I mean that is an interesting idea of where they will delineate, the difference between what's seasonal content, what's expansion, how much seasonal content will get carried over into the base game, where seasonal bonuses are applied on top of seasonal bonuses and such.
Right. I did like the other part too about saying, like, seasons are a great testing ground. We're gonna see what works, and then, if it doesn't, we get to scrap it. We get to say, you know what, we're not doing that ever again. Um, I'm fine with that. And then you
Yeah.
get your few seasons where playing that Zoo Druid was really good. It was the best. But by getting rid of those ferrets, it just can't compete anymore. It just can't compete with your fancy necromancers and sorcerers. So
And I mean, just even going through and talking about the ferrets shows that you're envious of demon hunters.
There you go. Exactly. They
yeah,
actually
I
have
forget
ferrets,
I forget
brother.
that they did have that, didn't they? That was one of their companions. It was
See, you're on the wrong class. You're still in the wrong
Yeah.
class. It's
no,
terrible. I
no,
hate to
I
see
don't
it.
think so. Um, I mean, why does a demon hunter have ferrets to begin with?
Gold find.
Yeah,
Yeah,
duh.
that's true.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Now there's a
You ever
trailer
watch
mod,
Beastmaster? I mean, come on. When we're going through and talking about like terrible movies,
but
from like the
I
'80s.
loved Beastmaster
I
as a
mean, I
child
love
was one of
Beastmaster
my
too,
favorites.
but we all have to we have to acknowledge it's a terrible movie,
Oh, it
Yeah.
but
is
we enjoyed it. Yeah.
terrible.
Yes.
I think, like, as a child, like Beastmaster and Running Man were like my two favorite movies. Um,
uh,
yeah, that says a lot, I think.
Does. Does.
And then Highlander, obviously.
Nice.
Okay, so I think we're closing out because we're going to dovetail into more tangents than are needed. So we'll close in our traditional manner with a friendly moo 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 moo.
Moo moo moo. Moo moo.
Woo!